Naomi had always believed that if she followed God faithfully, everything else would fall into place, including love. She grew up in church, youth group, Bible study, prayer meetings. Naomi wasn't new to faith. She knew what it meant to seek God first. But there was one area of life that always seemed a little unclear. Dating. The messages she heard growing up were simple, but not always helpful. Guard your heart. Wait on the Lord. Don't settle. But no one really explained what waiting actually looked like in real life, especially when your heart began noticing someone. And lately, Naomi's heart had noticed Daniel. It started small. 3 weeks earlier during the young adult Bible study, Naomi had seen him quietly stacking chairs while everyone else continued talking. He didn't seem to need attention. He didn't seem interested in being the loudest voice in the room. He simply served. And something about that caught her attention. Then she noticed other things. The way he listened carefully when someone spoke. The way he encouraged people without trying to impress them. The way he prayed during small group, calm, sincere, and thoughtful. He wasn't trying to perform spirituality. He was simply living it. And that was rare and quite attractive. But Naomi also knew something else. Christian dating wasn't like other dating she saw around her. Her friends outside of church had a very different approach. If you like him, just ask him out, one of her coworkers once told her. But Naomi felt like it wasn't that simple. She wanted more than attraction. She wanted purpose. She wanted a relationship that honored God. But that desire also brought questions. How do you know if someone is the one God has for you? How do you pursue a relationship without rushing ahead of God's timing? And how do you guard your heart without building walls so high that no one can ever reach you? These questions followed her everywhere. Even tonight, the young adult group had gathered again in the church fellowship hall. Conversations filled the room as people laughed and shared stories from their week. Naomi sat beside her best friend Jasmine, but her eyes kept drifting across the room. Daniel was there again, talking with a few of the guys near the snack table. Jasmine noticed. She always noticed. "You've looked over there at least 10 times, Jasmine whispered. "I have not." Jasmine smiled knowingly. "You like him?" Naomi hesitated, then quietly admitted, "I do, but I also respect him." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. That's the Christian version of really liking someone. Naomi laughed softly. Maybe Jasmine was right. But Naomi wasn't just afraid of rejection. She was afraid of something deeper. She had seen too many relationships, even Christian ones, start with excitement and end in heartbreak. She didn't want to rush into something that might pull her away from the path God had for her. Later that evening, as the gathering ended, people began stacking chairs and cleaning up. Naomi walked toward the door, gathering her coat. Then she heard a voice behind her. "Hey, Naomi." Daniel stood there. Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes. I've noticed you always ask thoughtful questions during Bible study," he said. Naomi blinked. "You noticed that?" Daniel nodded. "I appreciate people who take their faith seriously." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel continued. "Would you maybe want to grab lunch sometime and talk about some of those questions?" Naomi felt a mix of surprise, nervousness, and peace all at once. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. But something about the moment felt right. Still, Naomi had learned something important over the years. Even good opportunities should be brought before God. So instead of answering immediately, she smiled and said something honest. "I'd like that. But I'd also like to pray about it first." Daniel smiled. "That's exactly the answer I was hoping for." And in that moment, Naomi realized something. Christian dating wasn't about pretending you had no feelings. And it wasn't about chasing relationships without wisdom. It was about walking forward with both faith and honesty, trusting that when two people seek God first, He has a way of guiding their paths toward the right timing. And sometimes, what begins with a simple conversation becomes the beginning of something far greater than either of them imagined. But Naomi didn't know yet where this path would lead. Only God did. And for the first time in a long time, she felt peace in simply taking the next step. 2 weeks passed before Naomi and Daniel finally met for coffee. Not because they were avoiding it, but because they were both doing something unusual in modern dating. They were praying first. Naomi had spent those 2 weeks asking God a simple question. "Lord, help me see clearly." She didn't want excitement to cloud wisdom. She didn't want loneliness to make decisions for her. And she certainly didn't want to rush ahead of God. So when Friday morning finally arrived, Naomi walked into the small bakery shop downtown with a mixture of peace and nervous anticipation. Daniel was already there. He stood when he saw her. "Good morning," he said with a warm smile. Good morning, Naomi replied, sitting down. For the first few minutes, their conversation was light: work, church, favorite books, and the funny chaos of the last young adult gathering. But slowly the conversation shifted, from surface topics to deeper things. Daniel leaned forward slightly. So, he said gently, what made you want to take time to pray before meeting? Naomi paused for a moment before answering. Because I've learned something about my heart, she said. Daniel listened. When I rush into relationships, Naomi continued, I start paying more attention to the person than to God. Daniel nodded slowly. I respect that. Naomi studied his expression. What about you? She asked. Daniel took a breath. My last relationship was with someone who loved church, but didn't really love God. Naomi's eyebrows lifted slightly. It took me a long time to recognize the difference, he admitted. They both sat quietly for a moment. Then Daniel said something honest. I don't want to repeat that mistake. Naomi felt something shift inside her. This conversation felt different from the dating conversations she had seen before. It wasn't about impressing each other. It was about clarity, and clarity felt safe. Over the next few weeks, Naomi and Daniel continued meeting. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes after church, sometimes just walking and talking, and little by little, their connection deepened. They prayed together. They shared their testimonies. They talked about purpose, family, and what they believed God was calling them to do with their lives. Everything seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful, until the night the first test appeared. It happened unexpectedly. The young adult group had gone out for dinner after a service project. The restaurant was loud, filled with laughter and conversation. At one point, Daniel stepped away from the table to take a phone call. When he returned, his expression had changed. Naomi noticed immediately. Everything okay? She asked quietly. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, just an old friend calling. But Naomi sensed something deeper. Later that evening, as they walked toward the parking lot, she asked again, was everything really okay? Daniel stopped walking. For a moment, he looked like someone deciding whether to say something difficult. Then he spoke. That was my ex. Naomi's heart tightened slightly. She called to say she's moving back to the city, he continued, and she wants to talk. Silence settled between them. This was the moment Naomi had always feared in relationships. The moment when uncertainty enters. The moment when the past shows up at the door. Daniel looked at her honestly. I want to be transparent with you, he said. Naomi appreciated that. But transparency didn't remove the tension she felt. What are you thinking? She asked. Daniel took a deep breath. I think I need closure. Those words echoed in Naomi's mind. Closure. Other times, it meant reopening doors that should have stayed closed. Naomi felt a quiet battle beginning inside her heart. Part of her wanted to protect herself. Another part wanted to trust Daniel's integrity. And a third part whispered something deeper. Pray. I think we should pause. Daniel blinked. Pause. Yes, Naomi said calmly. If what we're building is from God, it can handle honesty and time. Daniel studied her face. You're not angry? No, she said softly. But I also don't want to pretend this isn't a moment that requires wisdom. Daniel nodded slowly. For the first time that evening, peace returned to his expression. You know, he said, that's one of the things I admire about you. What? She had heard that word before. Sometimes it meant healing. So Naomi looked at Daniel and said something unexpected. You choose faith over fear. Naomi smiled faintly. Not always. But tonight you did. They stood quietly under the glow of the streetlights, both realizing something important. Christian dating isn't just tested by attraction. It's tested by how two people handle uncertainty, honesty, and boundaries. And sometimes, the most powerful step forward in a relationship is the willingness to slow down. Naomi drove home that night with one prayer in her heart. Lord, if this relationship is from you, protect it. And if it isn't, reveal it. Because real faith doesn't just show up in the peaceful moments. It shows up when the path becomes unclear. And Naomi had a feeling. The next chapter of their story was about to reveal far more than either of them expected. For 3 days, Naomi tried not to think about it. But the thought kept returning. Daniel meeting his ex. Even though she had agreed to pause. Even though she had told him she trusted God. The question still lingered in the quiet spaces of her mind. What if he realizes he still loves her? Late one evening, Naomi sat on the edge of her bed. The lamp beside her cast a soft golden glow across the room. Her Bible lay open on Psalm 37, but her eyes kept drifting to the same verse without truly reading it. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in Him. She whispered softly, "Lord, I thought I had already surrendered this." But surrender had a strange way of resurfacing whenever the heart felt threatened. Across town, rain tapped lightly against the windows of a small cafe tucked between two brick buildings on Main Street. Daniel sat at a corner table. The warm scent of roasted coffee beans filled the air. Soft jazz played quietly through overhead speakers, and the low murmur of conversations created a steady hum around the room. Then the door opened. Rachel stepped inside. For a moment Daniel almost didn't recognize her. She looked slightly different, her hair shorter than before, a navy coat draped neatly over her shoulders. But her presence was unmistakable, confident, self-assured, and familiar. She spotted him quickly and walked toward the table. "Daniel, Rachel." They exchanged an awkward smile before sitting down. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. The waitress arrived, placing a small candle between them on the table. Rachel glanced at it and laughed softly. "Well, this feels more romantic than it should." "That definitely wasn't my intention." Daniel met her gaze calmly. Daniel chuckled nervously. Rachel leaned back in her chair, studying him. "You look different," she said. "How so?" "Calmer," she replied. "Less restless." Daniel shrugged slightly. "God has been working on me." Rachel raised an eyebrow with a hint of amusement. "He always seems to be." The waitress returned with 2 cups of coffee. Steam curled gently into the air as she set them down. Rachel stirred hers slowly, the small silver spoon clinking softly against the ceramic mug. "So," she said, glancing up at him, "I hear you've been seeing someone." Daniel wasn't surprised. Church communities had a way of circulating news quickly. "Yes," he said. Rachel tilted her head slightly. "Is it serious?" Daniel paused, choosing his words carefully. "It has the potential to be." Rachel gave a knowing smile. "You always did move slowly. This time I'm trying to move wisely." Rachel let out a quiet laugh and leaned her elbows on the table. "You know something funny," she said. "What?" "When I decided to move back here, I wondered if we might run into each other again." Daniel stayed silent. Rachel continued, "And part of me wondered if maybe we would try again." The words hung in the air between them. Outside the window, headlights swept across the rain-soaked street. Daniel felt something inside his chest shift. But it wasn't temptation. It was realization. A year ago those words might have stirred old emotions, but now they felt like something from a chapter that had already ended. Daniel spoke gently. "I think we both needed that relationship to teach us something." Rachel watched him carefully. But I'm not the same person I was then," Daniel said. "And I don't think going back would honor the growth God has done in both of us." Rachel was quiet. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug and stared into the coffee for a moment. Finally she nodded. "I had a feeling you might say that." Daniel's phone vibrated softly on the table. Rachel noticed immediately. Her eyes flicked down to the phone and then back to him. "She must be special," Rachel said. "She is." "What do you mean?" Rachel leaned forward a little, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "When I moved back, I ran into someone from your church." Daniel waited. His posture straightened. "What about her?" Rachel hesitated. "Apparently she's had a rough history with relationships." "What kind of history?" Rachel took a small sip of coffee. "A message from Naomi." Daniel smiled without hesitation. Rachel studied his face thoughtfully. Then she said something slowly. "Then there's something you should probably know." Daniel's expression shifted slightly. "They mentioned Naomi." Daniel's brow furrowed slightly. "From what I heard, the last guy she dated was also very serious about God." Daniel's jaw tightened subtly. "They said Naomi took it really hard." The cafe noise faded into the background. Instead, he looked out the rain-speckled window for a moment. The way Rachel said the phrase carried a hint of skepticism. But it turned out he wasn't exactly the man everyone thought he was. Rachel continued carefully. Silence settled between them. Finally Daniel spoke. "Everyone has a story." Rachel nodded slowly. "Yes, they do." Then she said something that lingered in the air between them. "But sometimes our past wounds shape how we love in the present." Daniel didn't respond immediately. Then he turned back to her. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but sometimes those wounds also teach us how to love better." Rachel studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled faintly. "Well," she said, reaching for her coat, "whoever she is, she seems to have met a different version of you than the one I knew." Daniel stood as she did. "God tends to do that." Rachel nodded once more before walking toward the door. And as the bell above the cafe door chimed softly behind her, Daniel realized something with complete clarity. The past had just closed its final chapter. But across town, Naomi had no idea what had been said inside that cafe, and when the truth finally reached her, it would force both of them to confront something deeper than attraction, trust, jealousy, and the question every Christian relationship eventually faces. Will we hold on to each other? Or will we truly surrender this to God? When faith meets the heart, part for the moment of surrender Sunday morning arrived, quietly. Sunlight streamed through the tall stained-glass windows of the church sanctuary, scattering colors across the wooden pews. The gentle hum of conversation filled the room as people greeted one another before service began. Naomi sat near the back. Her Bible rested in her lap, but her mind wasn't on the pages. She had barely slept the night before. Daniel had texted her, "Can we talk after church?" Simple words, but words that carried weight. Naomi's heart had been unsettled ever since. Across the room, she spotted Daniel speaking with a few people near the aisle. For a moment their eyes met. He gave a small, reassuring smile, but Naomi could see something in his expression. Seriousness, the kind that suggested an important conversation was coming. After the service, the sanctuary slowly emptied as people made their way toward the doors. Naomi stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. The sky was clear, and a soft breeze rustled the leaves in the nearby trees. Daniel walked toward her. "Thank you for waiting," he said. Naomi nodded quietly. They walked across the parking lot and stopped near a large oak tree that stood beside the church building. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel took a deep breath. "I met with Rachel." Naomi felt the words settle in her chest. "How did it go?" she asked softly. Daniel looked directly at her. "It gave me clarity." Relief flickered across Naomi's face, but Daniel wasn't finished. "She told me something," he continued. Naomi felt her stomach tighten. "What?" "She told me about your last relationship." Naomi's heart sank. For a moment she looked down at the pavement. "I wondered when that would come up," she said quietly. Daniel stepped closer. "You don't have to hide that part of your story." Naomi shook her head. "I'm not hiding it," she said. "I'm just careful now." Daniel nodded. "I understand." Naomi hesitated before speaking again. "That relationship almost pulled me away from my faith," she admitted. Daniel listened closely. "He said all the right things," she continued. "He prayed with me, talked about God constantly." Her voice softened. "But over time I realized something." "What?" Daniel asked gently. He loved the idea of being a godly man more than actually becoming one. Silence lingered. Daniel spoke carefully. Then Naomi looked at Daniel with honest vulnerability. "That's why I move slowly now," she said. Daniel took a moment before responding. "I'm glad you do." Naomi blinked in surprise. "You are?" "Yes, because the kind of relationship I want isn't built on excitement alone." He paused. "It's built on truth." For a moment Naomi felt the tension in her chest begin to ease. But Daniel wasn't finished. "There's something else I need to tell you." Naomi braced herself. "What?" Daniel looked toward the church building for a moment before speaking. "Rachel told me she thought we might try again." Naomi felt the wind catch slightly in her lungs. "And?" she asked carefully. Daniel looked back at her. "I told her no." Naomi stared at him. "Why?" Daniel's voice was calm but firm. Daniel's answer came without hesitation. "Because I'm not interested in going backward." Naomi felt tears gather in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. Daniel continued. "I'm not saying I know exactly where our story is going." He stepped closer. "But I do know this." "What?" Naomi whispered. "I want a relationship where both people are chasing God more than they're chasing each other." Naomi felt something inside her heart shift. Peace. The kind that comes when fear begins to loosen its grip. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. Naomi looked confused. "What's that?" Daniel unfolded it. "It's something I wrote during prayer this week." He handed it to her. Naomi read the words quietly. "Lord, if this relationship is from you, let it grow with wisdom and patience. If it is not from you, close the door before our hearts go too far. But above all else, keep you at the center." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "You prayed that?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded. "I realized something this week." "What?" "I don't want to hold onto you tighter than I hold onto God." The words were simple, but they carried deep meaning. Naomi folded the paper slowly. "You know what's strange?" she said. "What?" "I prayed almost the same prayer." Daniel smiled. "Then maybe we're both learning the same lesson." They stood quietly beneath the oak tree. For the first time since this journey began, neither of them felt pressure to control the future, because they understood something now. A relationship surrendered to God doesn't begin with certainty. It begins with trust. Daniel finally spoke. So what happens next? Naomi smiled softly. We keep walking. With God leading. Always. Daniel nodded. Then I think we're exactly where we're supposed to be. And as they walked back toward the church doors together, Naomi realized something beautiful. Sometimes the most dramatic moment in a love story isn't when two people choose each other. It's when they both choose God first. Because when God stands at the center of a relationship, every test becomes part of the foundation, and what begins with faith has the potential to grow into something far stronger than either heart could build alone. Thank you for listening to Threads of Grace. Sometimes love isn't proven by how tightly we hold on to someone, but by how willingly we place the relationship in God's hands. When two hearts choose God first, the story doesn't end. It begins the way it was always meant to. Like, subscribe and stay with us because the next story may challenge everything you think you know about love, grace, trust, faith, or forgiveness.